all start, I think people by now they obviously they know that you are going to talk about architectural photography. But for people to know you better, I would like to have a little introduction for them about you. So, Rananjay, I obviously know Rananjay, but for you people, Rananjay is very passionate about his work. And Ranjay comes from Rajasthan and he is currently based in Chicago, where he's pursued his master's in city design and is currently working in the architecture and construction sector in India as well as Chicago. So he has his practice since 2017 in Jaipur. His firm is called Jay Design Studio. He's always been very passionate about photography since a very young age. And born to parents who prized photography as a medium, he grew up with concepts of light, contrast, and composition. Being from Rajasthan, he is always surrounded by overwhelming colors, forms, landscape, where he learned the art of capturing complexities and creating contrast, which is still seen in his work. His background in architecture and city planning has helped him detect the frame and inherent life a built form has to offer. He follows his love and passion for photography wherever he goes, and he has exhibited his work in multiple platforms, cities, and occasions. Rananjay's parents, who've been a big support and have guided him through his journey, are also present for the event. Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. And that's, I think, thank you for coming for this event. It matters a lot to us. And I think we are good to start the event. Over to you, Rananjay. And I request everyone, if you please put your cameras on.
And your mic's off in case it might be on.
Yeah. And please keep it interactive. So it's going to be.
Is that from my end?
No, I think.
Okay, it's gone. Yeah, let me just share the screen again. Can everyone see the screen, the presentation specifically? Yes. Yeah, is it visible now? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can see. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Bhavna, for the introduction. And yeah, that couldn't have said it better. Like you said, I am an architect and urban designer by profession, but I've been following photography since an extremely young age. My parents will be fighting and have been fighting who has taught me photography amongst the two of them. But since they're here, let me just clarify. My father did teach me photography, but my mother taught me everything else in terms of design, architecture, interior sketching. So, but yeah, it's something that's there to learn from both the parties. But yeah, anyway, we'll start with architectural photography. And again, thank you, International School of Trends and Bhavna, for this opportunity, and welcome everybody. And thank you for having me. So, architectural photography. The first thing that I almost always start with is, why do we do what we do? It's why photography? Uh, why should we do it? Why is it important? The most basic thing is that as humans, we are more ignorant than we are smart. And how can we not be? Because there's so much going on, so much information constantly expanding. Inside a room or on a street, wherever you go, inside your own current room or the street right outside, there is so much data, so many events, and we see them but not perceive, hear but not really listen. And this is why photography and making it a habit can help. It can make you aware, constantly question, study, jump across frames in your head, or literally, as you see some photographers jumping around the street. And basically, it can make you be responsive and mindful to your surroundings. You constantly connect and converse with the environment you're in. Trained architects, designers, and photographers will know this feeling all too well, to the point sometimes it gets too much because we're constantly judging and moving the surrounding objects in our head and wishing a material or color were different, or hating on a random car or a person on the street that is in your frame, even when you might not even be clicking a picture, or when that building has nothing to do with you or is not your project, right? So it basically helps you be responsive. You're constantly aware of where you are, and that's a beautiful feeling to have. Additionally, photography is one tool that can help you transcend your locality. Okay, sorry, I had some weird message on my end, but yeah, photography is also one tool that can help you transcend your locality and at the same time completely immerse you into it. It may seem contradictory to some, but taking a simple example of how an artist or a painter or photographer or anybody, even a poet, ranging all the way back thousands of years, has continued to be inspired by something as simple as flowers or birds, right? Uh, and that's why most of any artist designer really start from something as simple as a flower or a bird. That's where the inspiration comes from. So, because something as simple as a flower can transcend you away from the utilitarian life into making you aware of the beauty and the depth around you. It's not uncommon to see an engineer today pick up, photography and then becoming amazing nature or bird photographers. I have so many friends and elders who have done the same because they can easily understand the technical aspects of a camera once they've picked it up, but it is the joy and the depth of the immersiveness that they achieve uh, when they're clicking the subject and when they connect to what they really, clicking and connecting with, which pulls them back into photography or any other uh, artist or, in their respective forms of art. So additionally, it both of these sort of combine to the fact that it elevates your design thinking. Uh, as a child, my father always taunted me for sleeping in the car and missing out on looking at the world outside. While he is absolutely correct, there is a lot to see and learn from. It is also true that during the times I was awake, I was constantly, putting characters on the fleeting wires that went past, or counting them, or going up and down them, or counting and zipping through the demarcations on the road. And stuff like that is extremely exhausting. And it's also true that sleeping is beautiful and far more convenient. But as a designer, you will always have your own imagination, a different parallel world to be in. And basically the point here is that through photography and other parallels of design, uh, even if you don't actively do them, because you won't always have your camera on you or not have the opportunity to click a picture, just being aware of these things can elevate your design thinking and can help you not only in your profession but also everyday matters. Then comes, of course, why do we do it? Because it's a great and thriving profession or hobby. It pushes you to travel, explore, capture moments that can be immortalized, and so much more, obviously. If someone wants, I could talk in depth about the opportunities one has in the field as like even a part-time or a full-time professional. But taking another example of the quick social media that we have, you can get temporary or partial celebrity status sometimes from it. We may be complete introverts in reality, but we all have a different social media persona that works, and that can help you sort of get that balance in life that one might want. Now moving on to basically architect versus the architectural photographer. What is the difference? Why are both of them important, and what needs to really happen here? Firstly, to understand, to be an architectural photographer, you need to know what an architect is. An architect is simply an artist who paints with brick, steel, wood, glass, and other building materials. She or he would be an artist whose canvas is space, whose designs involve structure, shape, and volume. What that basically means is they're working in three dimensional, of course, right? But the architectural photographer now reproduces the architect's three-dimensional creation on a two-dimensional sheet of photographic paper or other two-dimensional mediums, of course, right? So photographers must be sensitive to the aesthetic of the structure, how it serves its function, and how it relates to its environment as well. Like on the left, you see the Sears Tower of Chicago, which is the tallest building for the past 20 years. No matter where you go, just like the Eiffel Tower, you see it from everywhere. But so many people have photographed it in so many ways. And usually how you see it is, just next to perfect, clean streets, beautiful cars, but that's not everyone's reality. Some people do see a lot of wires, a lot of different boards and billboards and different materials that you would not see in downtown. So that's why it's important for the architectural photographer to be able to understand this aspect of things. uh, so now hopefully if I've told you what, if you've at least understood a very small aspect of how architect versus the architectural photographer can really produce the 3D to 2D, let's move on to the very basics of architectural photography. So to understand most of photography, and Bhavna, this is like a reminder for 3 years ago or 4 years ago when I told you, okay, just listen to this. History is repeating itself. But you just need to understand three things in photography. If you understand this, you will be able to produce 80% of the work. And that's why I'm going to start with the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, basically states that to achieve 80% of the results, you need only 20% of the effort, right? You're all designers. A lot of you are interior design or architecture students or professionals. When you did group work in college, if there were 5 students, only 1 or 2 of them actually did the work, right? So 20-30% of the effort actually produced 80% of the product. So if you understand the three things I'm about to tell you about photography in the next 10-15 minutes or so, which is only about 20% of everything that photography is as a whole, you will still be able to achieve 80% of the results compared to even professional photographs. But of course, like, there is a lot more to be a photographer, and that to a great one. So we'll start with the first thing, which is the ISO. I People say ISO, but it basically is ISO. It is not an acronym for anything. It used to stand for International Standardization Organization, but it makes no sense anymore. So it is ISO. It does not stand for anything. First thing, ISO is basically I'll tell you the three things first. The first thing is the ISO, the second is shutter speed, and the third is aperture, right? So we'll begin with ISO. First thing you should set in pretty much any given scenario is the ISO. Okay. What it basically means is it is the sensitivity of your camera sensor. The higher the number, the more sensitive your camera is going to be towards light. The lower the number, the less sensitive. That's why if you see this arrow, it starts at 100. Usually that's the lowest ISO in a camera, and it can go up to 30,000, 36,000, sometimes even more, in not in numbers, but they have H1, H2 status. But lower the number, the less sensitive your camera will be. The higher the number, the more sensitive your camera sensor will be towards light. So why not shoot up the ISO to as much as possible to be able to capture all of the light? Absolutely not, because it's the exact opposite. Why? I'll tell you. Because if you see this example, I clicked a photo of the Harrison Hotel in Chicago, and this photo I clicked at 400 ISO, and this photo I clicked at 25,000 ISO. Can you see the grains and the lack of quality that it achieves? Of course, I shot it up a little too extra just to be able to show this example, but this is what it does. While it captures more light, it loses its clarity and quality. And the more quality you have, the more you can play with it. So because I had a very high quality image, I could play around with it and convert it into a different piece of art altogether. This is just one example. Of course, it is washed out in some places, but that's the aesthetic that I wanted to achieve. So I'm not saying that you do this to your photos and convert it, but the idea is the more crisp and quality you have, the finer quality you'll be able to convert it to in terms of print, in terms of social media, in terms of, artworks like this. Uh, So again, ISO is also a big reason that the camera body prices differ. When you buy a camera, usually there's two things that go with it. One is the camera and the other is the lens. Sometimes the lens is more expensive than the camera itself. That'll make sense once we move ahead. But ISO is one of the bigger reasons why the camera body value differs. Okay. In terms of cheaper cameras, they can go up to 800 or 1600 ISO before getting grainy. Uh, Whereas the more expensive cameras, they can go up to 10,000 ISO and still not be grainy and still maintain that quality. So essentially in photography, you pay more for light, right? So the more you pay, the better light you get. Uh, a quick recap, ISO is basically the sensitivity of your camera's sensor, and keep the ISO as low as possible. That's all you need to know. Some tips for what your ISO should be at when you're clicking. Of course, this is extremely subjective depending upon how much light there actually is, but these can be considered somewhat, rule of thumb to follow in most cases. So if you're outdoors in the sunlight, your ISO can be 100 or 200 because you already have all the natural light that you would want. And then if you're in a shade under a tree or something, then your ISO can range between 200 to 400. When you go indoors, again, this is for the interior designers, it's a huge range. It can go from 400 to 3200 to even more. But ideally, in no given circumstance, should you be clicking at more than 3200 ISO, that too if you have a really good camera. Otherwise, I would recommend never cross 1600. Okay, but again, these are all very subjective matters and it depends what you want. If you just want a record shot and the subject should be at least visible, then crank it up to as far as you need. So this was ISO. Now the second thing is shutter speed. Shutter speed is extremely simple. It's literally what it says. It's measured in time, usually seconds. It is the amount of time that your shutter is open to capture your subject, right? So you'll see numbers like 1/60th of a second or 100th of a second, or even go as far as 1/8000th of a second. On the other side, it can open for 1 second. Like here, you can see half second, 1 second. It goes further to 5 seconds or 30 seconds. With the use of a intervalometer, you can even open your shutter for minutes, and that's how you see, stars and light trails and those kind of things. So while shutter speed controls how long your shutter is open, it also controls motion blur. That's the second most important thing about shutter speed that you need to know. So it's just how long the shutter is open for, and you can control motion blur. I'll show you some examples here. So in this case, the goalkeeper is saving the ball in the air and he's dived, but he's perfectly still. Nothing is in motion. Everything is pretty crisp and clear because the shutter speed must have been, this picture must have been clicked at 1/4000. Pita, can you please mute your, okay, never mind, I muted. Yeah. So in this case, the photo was clicked at possibly 1/2000th of a second or 1/4000th of a second. That's why the person in the air is completely frozen in time, right? Here, you must have seen a lot of pictures like this where water feels like smoke. Now, how does that happen? Because the shutter is open for a couple seconds. Ek to the natural light around is pretty less. And in this example, of course, this could be more or less, but I've written it's usually roughly around 4 seconds. So once you've opened the shutter, your shutter is capturing the movement of the water for the next 4 seconds. So if the water was at the top of the waterfall in the next 4 seconds, if it comes midway or from midway to bottom or all the way down, it'll capture that movement. And that movement is what creates that smoky effect, right? So in this case, the shutter was open for 4 seconds. That's why you can achieve that effect. Then you see a lot of pictures of, starry nights, galaxies, or even the trails, the back trails or the front lights, headlights of the car in a line. Like if you're in a big city, you would have seen, like Bombay, for example, Marine Drive, where we see a lot of photos where you see trails of red trails and white trails. How is that done? That is done with keeping a shutter open for many seconds or even minutes at a time. You click stars like this for roughly 3 minutes. Again, if from a camera you can't do it, you need an external intervalometer. That's the technical term, but it's just another shutter where you have a fancy button, and as long as you hold it or lock it, your shutter will be open. So that's what shutter speed does. Quick recap, it's basically the amount of time your shutter will be open. Longer it is open, more light, and vice versa, right? Because again, if it's open, more light is coming in every second. In the last picture, if you see, every star is amplified so bright because your shutter is open for 180 seconds, and that little light is being amplified every second, every second, every second. So for 180 seconds, even the tiniest of stars has been made pretty visible. Okay, it also controls motion blur, as we saw in the example of the water, or the opposite where the goalkeeper was flying in the air and frozen. Again, these are subjective, but for sports and fast subjects, you want to be at 1/800th of a second. Most of the times, even 1/500th of a second is fine. If you're clicking kids, then they don't move as fast. So 1/8, 500 to 800 is fine. If you're shooting for, college events and other things, then 1/2000 is fine. But if you're shooting professional level where every second those athletes are making a difference and making fast movements, then you go up to 1/8000 of a second. For portraits, you want your background, if trees are moving, flowers are moving, or filmy scene is happening, but you want your heroine to look pretty clear. So you ask them to stay still, but everything that happens in 100th of a second, any movement that happens in 100th of a second will be captured. But you want things to be pretty crisp, right? Like face details and everything. That's why it can go a little here and there again, because again, this is subjective, but from 100th of a second to 1/800th of a second. 1/800th is pretty extreme, but somewhere in between. If you want to capture light, stars, and these kind of things, then you want to, crank it up on the other side for as long as you can. But how do you do that? You need a tripod for this. We will be discussing equipments in the next seminar. So again, please come in the next one as well. But yeah, you need a tripod, because if your hand is moving and you're holding the camera for 5 seconds, every movement will be captured with it. And if you think, main to bhai Shaktiman hu, my hand is not going to move for 5 seconds, you are extremely wrong. Okay, because your heartbeat and the blood flowing in you is going to move your body constantly. You might not be aware of it, but photography will make you aware of it. Take it as a challenge if you don't believe me. Third thing is aperture. So aperture is basically the size of the opening in the lens. Until now, we've discussed how long it will be open for, but now it's about how much opening you want to give it for that period of time. Okay, so your lens has blades inside it to create a smaller or larger hole. This part of the camera is also called the iris. It's basically between the body and the front of your lens. Similar to our eyes, when there's a lot of light, the opening in our eyes gets smaller. And if there's lesser light, it's bigger. If you have a friend who has light colored eyes or light brown eyes, even grab hold of them and flash light into their eyes and see their iris go up and down. Don't blind them, please, and blame it on me, but you can see it happen. Even if you walk across from one room to the other, or if you step outside the house suddenly, this is a thing that your eyes are all constantly doing. The iris is going smaller and bigger. So, but aperture is where things get a little complicated, because if photographers didn't get a chance to make something seemingly difficult, how would they feel superior? मतलब उनको थोड़ी चीज तो चाहिए कि थोड़ा लगे इंसान को यार थोड़ा complex है. But the only tricky part is that the smaller the number, the larger the hole, right? So the larger the hole, more light comes in. The bigger the number, smaller the hole, less light comes in. Okay. These numbers are written in f-stops. So if you see at the bottom, it's f/2.8, f/4. These are called f-stops. So again, the smaller the number, larger the hole, more light comes in. Bigger the number, smaller the hole, less light comes in. Okay, and it is extremely easy to remember how these numbers work. It might seem complicated. What is 2.8? What is 5.6, 1.4? Don't get confused. It's very simple. You just need to remember two numbers, that is 1 and 1.4. If you see the image above, 1 is not there because I couldn't find it in this reference, but imagine there's another lens right left of it, which is even has completely open lens. So you take 1 and you double it alternatively. So from 1 you go to 2, which is right here. From 2 you go to 4. From 4 you go to 8, 8 to 16, 16 to 32, 32 to 64. 64 is not really a thing, maybe in some extreme end cameras, but it basically doubles alternatively. Again, in 1.4, it goes from 1.4 to 2.8, 2.8 to 5.6, 5.6 to 11, 11 to 22, 22 to 44, right? Now, if somebody noticed and said 5.6 ka double 11 nahi hota, you need to chill a little in life, okay? Just remember that ye cheese kind of doubles up. This is the only exception where it happens. And a lot of times you don't get these numbers. Like sometimes you'll get 3.5. It depends on camera to camera. But then you know that, after a break, you will have an aperture option of 7 because that 3.5 is going to double up into 7. Usually the kit lens that you get, kit lens is basically what you get as a base camera lens, right? Which is 18 to 55 mm. You would get between f3.5 to f38. Sony has, I think, f3.5 to 36. So what that means is the largest your lens can open in these cases would be f3.5. So somewhere in between these two, right? But if you go for much more expensive lenses, which are often more expensive than your camera bodies, they can open up to 1.4 also, which can get in all the light, all the, it's a whole different ball game, and it's really beautiful. Uh, Bhavna would know I borrowed Rohit's lens, and he was kind enough to lend me, and that was the first time that I used a wide angle lens. And for architecture photography, uh, it's it's like eating dairy milk for the first time is the only reference I can give you. It's beautiful. It really changes the game altogether. But again, all you need to remember is smaller the number, smaller the f-stop, larger the hole, bigger the number, smaller the hole, less light. Okay. Uh, the second and the most important thing that I want you to remember actually about aperture is not just that what I said. Of course, that's how it works. But the most important thing, and this is where professionals this is what professionals use aperture for. It's for the depth of field. Okay, depth of field in photography is basically how much is in focus in front and behind your point of focus. Point of focus in this case is this person, right? This lady is the point of focus. So if you see, I'm getting this weird zoom thing above, but whatever the f-stop is on the top left, it must be 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it is, you'll see that the background is completely blurred behind her, right? And on the extreme end, F22, the background is perfectly clear. So how do you really use aperture? Because you control the depth of field through aperture. So what you want to do is if you're clicking a single person, then that bokeh effect, how do we really get it? We put aperture really low. We'll put it at 2.4 or maybe 3, 1 if we can in some sense, right? If you're clicking multiple people, a group of people, then they might be thoda sa, at different distances from you. So you want to crank it up to maybe 5.6 to maybe 8. So everybody is in focus. Somebody's face is not going out of focus and they'll hate on you and report you on Instagram. But if you're doing, say, landscape photography where you want the tree in front of you to be in focus and the mountains behind to be in focus with the birds flying in the air and the sun that comes out with a smile should also be in focus in everything, you go with higher stuff. I would be like, F22 and F16s, and depends like how as far as it can go. But of course, you don't want to take it to extreme. You'll see once you play around with these things. Quick recap again. With aperture, it's basically the size of openings in the lens. Lower f-stop means more light, higher f-stop means less light. Why is it f-stop? The very basics I'll tell you quickly. It has to do with the area of your lens. Okay, it has to do with the diameter and the area of your lens. So it has to, if it's doubled, it has to be multiplied by a square root of 2. If it's reduced, then it has to be divided by a square root of 2. That's basically it. But you don't need to get into it too much. This was just for the nerds, if there are any like me. But lower f-stop means more light, higher f-stop means less light. More importantly, it controls the depth of field. Okay, so anybody has any questions? Do we want to take a 2-minute break? Because listening to myself also gets tiring. Any questions, please let me know.
Do you guys have any questions so far?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I was saying if we want to take a break, we can take a break too for 2 minutes. Otherwise, I can proceed. Okay, so yeah, I'll just
I think
briefly.
let's proceed. I
Yeah,
don't
so
think anyone has any question right now.
right. Otherwise, you can always ask me. Just feel free to stop me whenever, or also at the end of each segment. There'll also be another break somewhere ahead. But yeah, now we're going to move to how are these lines being created? Sorry about that. Now we're going to move to principles of architectural photography. Okay, sorry, my annotate got clicked. But yeah, so principles of architectural photography. While you don't actually have to be trained in architecture, you should be familiar with the basic concepts and terminology of the field, as well as the history of major styles. This is again something if you want to know the depth, what styles you should know, what styles would we usually come across depending upon what region you're in or where you might travel. Feel free to ask me. I'll throw some at you and I can even share some study material. But the important point here is that just as a good sports photographer should know and understand the sports they cover, it's a plus for architectural photographers to understand and relate to the general concepts of architecture and to bring their unique talents to the genre that they're clicking specifically, right? So as architecture has grown in complexity, sophistication, architectural photography must also illustrate a project's sustainability, energy efficiency, and the beneficial community impact, if any, because an architectural photographer sees things from a completely different perspective. But it's also important to know what the architect was thinking in that matter. So uh, also the architect or the client or his fellow architects to see the work in a dramatic presentation, that emphasizes the flow of line, the use of space, the interplay of textures, the play of light, and the rendering of the details. uh, and as the photographer, they would expect you to capture their works and its monumental essence in a frozen image, right? Because if an architect is not feeling the vibe that he imagined his work to be, then you're not really going to be a very good architectural photographer. Now it might be that you're showing a face that is completely different. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that you need to understand the project both as a user as well as the architect. So that's why it's important to understand these principles of architectural photography. And I won't be able to cover all the photography principles, of course, and a lot of actual tricks on how to follow these principles would come in the second seminar, as I've said. uh, but the objective here is to be able to teach you the core and the most important elements that make a good architectural photograph. And I can assure you, if you have a good command on these 3 or 4 principles that I'm about to tell you, in a year's time or 2 years' time, you can give these seminars that I'm giving today. Because at the very core and at the very basics, there's not a lot to understand. It's all about the tools are very simple. It's all about how you use those tools, right? A lot of you must know Photoshop by now. Understanding the tools of Photoshop is not tough. It's all about how you use those tools, really. The same applies for architectural photography. So the most important thing is perspective and photography. We'll talk about perspective in a lot of ways for the next 3-4 slides. Uh, Before we get the right perspective, it is very important to know where to stand. And a good photographer will always know where to stand. And a lot of times, the better photo is a few inches away, right? Because sometimes we think we have the perfect frame, perfect placement, but try to move outside from your viewfinder or where you're standing. Try to really use your, architect or interior designer skills and sort of zoom out and transcend yourself out of that space and try to imagine better angles and better spaces to take the photograph from. It's very important to always rethink and reconsider where you're clicking photos from. I'll give you the example of this photo, how I took it. Two photographs of the same subject taken from two different points of view can create totally two different stories, right? Because there have been so many examples of so many photographs where somebody has clicked a photo and somebody else has clicked a photo. The only difference was a couple steps, a single subject, a small detail that has made all the difference. And again, being designers, it's those little details that really set you apart. Uh, I give this example to my students a lot. They would be really exhausted from hearing this, but it's very important for designers to understand this. Imagine there were 25 students, any in field of photography or interior design, since there's a lot of interior designers there. Uh, you were all asked to do a sketch of a room. So all 25 of you could easily do a sketch of a room, but only 10 of you would think about the detail of what the legs of the table in that room would look like. Maybe you would go to the finer detail of giving local context of maybe cabriolet legs or Queen Anne furniture details or stuff like that. Only 5 of you would put a glass on that table with water, right? Only 2 or 3 of you would go to the finer detail of electrical switches on the walls. And only one of you, if at all, would really go to the detail of finding that cobweb or spider web in the corner of the room. So it's all about finding that finer detail, and that finer detail can really come from the very basics and these little things that I'm about to tell you. So an architect wants his building to look as he designed it. So vertical lines need to be vertical and horizontal need to be horizontal. As I said, the architect wants his photos to come as he intended them to be. If you're standing at the ground floor and the building is 10 floors high, he does not want you to show the building like that, because that is not how he intended it and that is not how he designed it, right? So for this example, I wanted to click this building in the middle, which is the mid-tiered building designed by Louis Sullivan. Some of you must have heard of Louis Sullivan, of course. And of course, it's a very important and beautiful building. And I wanted to, juxtapose it with the black building on the right. First, I just wanted to click the picture. So picture of the building. So I went very close to it, but I could not find the angle to be able to cover the whole building and do justice to it. So I stepped back and I found that just behind me actually was a black building. And I thought the building I want to click is white. The building behind me is black. That would make a really nice juxtaposition next to each other. And then I realized if I move further back, there was a train that would add movement to the picture. So I moved from the building, I moved at least 300, 400 meters away, where I could capture the building with these beautiful lights on the side, juxtaposed, which even covers half of the picture with black, and then the rest of it becomes white. Puts this picture, which is like a precursor to all the buildings that came in Chicago later. These windows that you see are in the building behind it that was built almost 40, 50 years later. These details you would find in the buildings right next to each other. And so basically, there's a lot of history and context in this picture that could have not easily been there if I had not moved. I'm not saying this is a perfect picture or anything. It's just an example that I would have clicked something that would not at least made me nearly as happy if I had clicked the original picture from the original place. And again, the vertical lines are perfectly vertical. The horizontal lines are perfectly horizontal. And that's how the architect designed it as well. So again, this is the photographer must have wanted this building to look at least somewhat normal, but this building on the right seems to be falling backwards, right? And this is something that happens when you're moving around. You don't have the time to stand and click uh, pictures with, a tripod or the perfect perspective, but this is something we can control. And this is something I'll teach you in the next class as well, how to actually perspective control. This is something that could be done within the camera as well. And it is important to do these things as closely as possible in the camera first, and then do the finer details in post production. This is again a beautiful photo and a perfect example. Why I like it is we have all seen pictures of Eiffel Tower somewhere or the other. And this must not be a photo that most of you would have commonly seen at least. Why I like this picture is because you can see everything that you need to know about the Eiffel Tower in this. You can see the structural elements, details, how it is made. You can see the levels it has. It has this level at the very base. It has this level, the second level, the third level. I have been there, so I know this is where the restaurants are. This is where the walking pedestal is. And at the top is obviously the viewing point and everything. Then I have some idea about the ground as well. I know the scale of things, how wide it is, how tall it is, how the light is falling on it, how the shadows is playing. So you have so much of detail from, again, just that movement from another setting. And this photo is a perfect example of finding that spider web in that corner of the room. It might not be the taste of everybody else. Some people like it from far away to see the front. Of course, that's I'm not saying that's any less good or anything, but this, for an architect, I'm sure an architect would be able to appreciate this a lot more, or whoever built this would be able to appreciate this a lot more. Then comes linear perspective. We start with something very basic. Some of you might be like, why am I telling you, the line of sight or basics like this? But it is all about the line of sight, right? Why line of sight and why linear perspective? Because linear perspective is basically, if something is closer to you, it is going to look big. If something is further away, it is going to look smaller. Pretty basic. That's how I see it. That's how the camera should also show products. But again, in interior design and in architecture, sometimes a subject that is in front of us, imagine a table, you're clicking interior or something else or anything else, it becomes extremely odd or disproportionate. So you want to move a table or you want to move a car, or some issues always happen. So it's always important to understand the line of sight. In this case, the very left, your line of sight is right in the middle. Everything that would be parallel to the line of sight would converge at the end, right? And even if you move parallel to the line of sight, like in this case, you've moved away in the center, you moved away from the tracks, even then your everything that is parallel to the line of sight would still converge at the end of the line of sight. But in architecture, you don't have a single facade, a single wall. Sometimes the design is different. Sometimes the walls are perpendicular. I mean, usually they are perpendicular, but you have multiple buildings all together. So how do you battle that? That happens when your line of sight is not matching. I mean, when there are multiple vanishing points, right? And you can only have a single line of sight. So that's how you need to prioritize what your line of sight needs to be. But it's all about the game of line of sight in architectural photography. That's how you achieve your vertical and horizontal lines as well. It'll all make sense once I move to the examples ahead. Uh, Line of sight basically talks about vanishing points as well, right? I told you everything converges at the end of the line of sight. So if even if it's verticals or the horizontal struts or whatever you call them of the railway tracks also end here, everything, if there were light poles or anything, they would also end at the end of it, right? But if you have different views and different line of sights, then they would not meet at a single thing, right? The railway tracks ka, uh, points would meet at this vanishing point, and this would be a different vanishing point. So where do these two things come in play in architectural photography? We look at this example here. We commonly click pictures of buildings and stuff, right? In this example, you see a building and you see two facades of it. The front is on the right and the side is on the left in this case, okay? And you see the vanishing points are outside of the picture, right? A lot of times, this is how we usually click buildings, but this is not the right way. And of course, when I say this is not the right way, sometimes it could be, but usually from architectural principles, it is not. here we see two basic sets of horizontal parallel lines. एक तो आपका ground level and the second is roof level, right? These are two horizontal lines that you have, and both of them are converging outside of the frame. Okay, the vanishing point is falling outside of the frame of the picture. And if you, sometimes how we click things is we position ourselves in the middle. In this case, it's still kind of middle, but imagine that this is perfectly in the middle, and the vanishing point for both would be equidistant from one edge to the other, right? Because we're at the very corner of the picture. But what this does is it creates a very static image. There is no dynamism in the photo. There's nothing that really moves you in the picture. That's why what you need to do is you need to change the angle that you're looking at. What you need to do is you need to come towards one specific facade. Usually a rule of thumb could be the front facade, right? Because that's where the more emphasis and other details lie. So if you change your angle of view, you can move to the vanishing point. You can move one of the vanishing points within the picture. In this case, the vanishing point on the left is within the picture and the right one is outside, but at least the edge of the building itself is almost a feet or 2 feet away from the edge. So what happens is on the left, your vanishing lines are converging more rapidly. So your brain is automatically emphasizing on the aspect that it is 3D, and it's sort of, you know, bringing your eyes towards that front facade, which holds more dominance anyway in your photos. So this is a very simple trick, but it again makes all the difference in residential and a lot of architectural photography that we do. So this way the one face predominates and is a foot or two outside the frame on the right, as you can see, and the other one is within the frame. This also brings emphasis to the finer details that might be on the front of the building that you would be missing if you had, you know, stood at the corner. So these are the two basic differences. The left is how you usually should be. Of course, there could be cases where it might not look as good, but this is how one should, like, one of the vanishing points should be within the frame, and the other side should be a foot or two, some distance away from the edge of the frame. Vertical lines. Vertical lines are extremely important. Of course, I've said it in the past as well, in past as well, that vertical lines should be vertical, horizontal should be horizontal as much as possible. But if they're like this, then it feels like your building is falling backwards, right? And this is how most of us click pictures when we're clicking buildings, because we don't have that space or we can't go to the building on the opposite end in front. But there's ways to fix this. And this thing is called perspective distortion. Okay, it could be from the sideways things also that I showed you, and it could also be from the vertical aspect that I showed you right that I'm showing you right now. So perspective distortion occurs when we've sort of tilted our camera. It's not straight. We've sort of tilted up our camera towards the top of the building to be able to fit the top of the building into a frame. I do this a lot. I forget a lot. But अगर आपने अभी तक कुछ नहीं सुना, you've not understood anything even or anything at all, just remember this. 90% of the times, in fact, I want to say 100% of the times, but just consider most of the time, the back of your camera must be vertical. If you're tilting your camera up and down, you're doing something wrong, or you're not standing in the right place. Okay, so if you think that you need to tilt your camera up and down, think, can I move backwards or can I move somewhere else to be able to take this picture to keep the back of my camera vertical? Okay, again, this is not a hardbound rule. Sometimes you want to show a building sort of falling backwards or coming towards you to show how big it is or how grand it is. There are cases where you want to show those things. But again, for the more finer quality of architectural photography and how architects would want to perceive their projects, you always want to keep the back of your camera perfectly vertical. Okay, just remember this, and you'll 50% of everything, all the gyan that I'm giving you is within this line itself. Then the ship's pro effect. This is also something we face a lot. Sometimes you see when you're clicking the corner of a building, the corner of it seems to be coming right at you or seems extremely disproportionate, like the prow of the ship, right? Like it comes outwards. Buildings don't usually have that kind of facade. They are pretty flat usually, right? So, but in pictures that looks quite disproportionate. So we can change that. Like this example of this building, you see that the edge is coming out pretty, like, it seems like the building is coming towards you, although the building might be pretty vertical. And this is the ship's pro effect. So the reason why this is happening is because the camera is pointed towards the corner of the building. So there's two ways to fix this. I mean, I'll come to that in a second, but you can see that the edge is disproportionately large. How you can fix it is quite simple. Firstly, you have perspective control. You can change the center of focus from the corner of the building slightly towards the right, or you also have settings within your camera, or there are things called tilt shift lenses that I'll come to in the next seminar, where you get special lenses for architecture photography where your lens can shift up and down and left and right. And that's how you can control this sort of thing, right? So you can see the difference. This seems quite odd and does not look natural to the eye, while this at least somewhat does. And at the same time, there's another difference. On the left, you'll see that these lines on the left, they don't seem parallel. They would seem to be converging at a point, right? And in this case, they kind of seem parallel. It might not be perfect parallel, you might argue with it, but it's at least better. And you're not missing out on any of the details from the previous picture. Okay, so the lines are not converging. You're showing a bit more of the other side. It looks more balanced. The ship's pro effect is not there. And it sort of seems more balanced. But again, like I said in every other rule, sometimes the ship's pro effect is what you want in your picture. So if you want it, you know where to focus your camera towards the corner of the building. Balance. Everything in life requires balance. We all know that. Uh, if you have balance, there is stability in a photograph. If there's no balance, then there'll be disunity, unrest, and you just won't feel that vibe with that picture. You won't connect to that picture. Somebody has their hand up. Just stop me after this one. I can answer any questions. But if you look at this example in this photo, you can see in the front, the black building has a lot of details in it. It has these bricks that are clearly visible. It has these red highlights. It has, those window bit top and bottom. It has those details on the sill and lintel. And it's a lot, right? And that's balanced with the white facade. Firstly, it's the opposite of what the building in front is. It's white. It doesn't have so many different textures. It doesn't have that strongness. It's pretty simple, plain, flat, same same common texture following through and through. So that's how sort of balanced the very weird black with sort of burning red hint bricks versus the very modernistic jolly that the building right next to it has used. Again, I'm not saying this is the perfect example, but at least in my head, I thought it would be able to balance the two very different architectural materials. Also a little, I should have mentioned this earlier, all the photos that I'm showing you that are mine, they are from this series called This versus That, which I shot in Chicago a year ago. And the idea was just to be able to juxtapose two different architectural mediums, materials, or buildings from different eras right next to each other. So that's why I will be using architects' favorite word, juxtaposition, a lot, and just comparing materials and buildings and stuff like that. So there's three ways that you can find balance, and they're very simple. We all learn about it. The first is symmetry. Everybody loves it. My father loves it. My mother loves it. Your teacher loves it. Our eyes love it. Our brains love it. If there's symmetry, there is comfort within symmetry, right? Within this picture also, this little covering of these two floors is very discomforting. You're like, how is this symmetry? To usme kapda hai. But your eye and your brain is already filling in those gaps. That's why I'm saying that your brain loves symmetry. It's finding those gaps where the symmetry is not. Okay. So symmetry will automatically sort of calm your brain and things make sense. So your brain is happy. Second is asymmetry. And I think of everything else in between. Like sometimes there is order and disorder, we say, for a lot of things in the Indian context, especially on the Indian street, right? Even if there is asymmetry, there is still beauty because there would be still some balance in things. If there's a lot of people on the eye level, there would be a lot of buyers above it to balance all that density in some sense, or the opposite, right? The third thing is, a lot of you will say this is a different principle altogether. It's not balance, contrast to alag hi principle hai. It is, but it can help you find balance in your images. Okay, to take the example here, the very linear and very closely packed structural elements in that picture are balanced with the gray bricks and the thick facade in front. And again, white versus black or little brown or whatever that color is. So it kind of helps you find balance in those things. So rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is one of the most important and the most basic principles we use. Again, this is something that your eye naturally likes. It talks about dividing your image into 9 blocks, vertically and horizontally. What it says is that you must place your point of your subject or point of interaction on those lines. So if you see this example, you would see that this lady is, if you divide this picture vertically, let me use this. Actually, yeah. So if you see that this would be a third, this would be a third, this would be a third, and this would be a third of the photo. So this, in this case, the box water, the company is the main objective, right? So their product is placed perfectly on the third quadrant, sorry, not third quadrant, the third part of the photo. And this person also is in the third part of the photo. And then it gives you all that 2/3 of space for your context, your background, whatever detail you might want to show, right? So if you place an image on, so if you place your image with the rule of thirds, your eye will naturally go towards them. Okay. Even if you don't, your eye will look to those parts in an image because that's how our mind usually perceives and reads things. Okay. So the theory is it'll enable the viewer of the image to interact with it more naturally. Another example is that this picture that I've taken, what I've done is I could have easily just divided this into half and half, and that would be a perfect, comparison between this and this, these two very different kind of buildings, modern versus postmodernism. But I chose to give a little breathing space, a little, natural context of, what the sky might have been like in that case. And that sort of gives a different balance and harmony in the picture. Then it can be used in different parallels of photography also. You don't have to do it just in architecture. It is used a lot in portrait photography. I gave you an example where the lady was standing with the water tetra pack or whatever. It's not a bottle. That's the objective of the product. But in this case, what I did was I divided into thirds again, like the 1/3 of the photo. This golden pinnacle is the most important part of my photo, right? Like it obviously stands out from everything else, and it is naturally placed on this third of the photo. Another thing that I followed here is that the 3 buildings besides this are 3 different volumes because they're 3 different architectural styles as well, right? So 1/3 of the building, sorry, 1/3 of the photo covers this building, at least the weight of the building. Thoda upar niche ho raha hai. 1/3 of it covers this building and this one pretty much together, and the rest covers this. So it's not something that you have to follow precisely to the grid and everything, but it's something that makes it easier for your eye to see, read, and perceive. Okay. So rule of thirds is also something that you can easily do. And it's something once you do, your camera will, your hands and eye will automatically do it. Then from the rule of thirds to the rule of 3. The rule of 3s are used a lot. They're used in print media. Don't use more than 3 sizes of text, fonts, and details, right? They tell you that in your portfolios as well. They tell you that in graphic design as well. They tell you that in pretty much everything. So 3 से ज़्यादा चीज़ें our mind cannot perceive that easily. Things get too complicated then. But the first is have a theme for your picture. That's very important. Even if you're clicking a picture today that might stand out or be individual or have no relation to anything else, make it a part of a broader context or a broader theme. I'll give you an example here on the right. This was one of the first pictures that I took when I came to Chicago. And seeing this mural on this wall, I was like, that's how I feel as well, because you have this architectural style versus this architectural style versus this architectural style. And I was like, there's a lot of competition between buildings and there's a lot of different styles and everything. And I this is where the this versus that ka series ka idea came. But I didn't shoot another picture within the series for another year and a half almost. But it helped me because almost a year and a half ago I made a pitch, I clicked a picture and I made it part of a larger context and a story for myself. Okay, so I made a theme that I stuck to. So even if you're clicking a picture, try to think from a broader perspective. Who would this relate to? Who can I show it to? What can I link it with? And if it can be part of a larger theme of things. Okay, that'll help you sort of refine things and even find things to do again. Second is focus attention. This is also very important. Uh, you all must be on Instagram or Facebook or some social media somewhere. The life of a picture these days is a couple seconds at best, right? If somebody is looking at your picture for 5 seconds, you've probably beat a million pictures by a good 3 seconds, right? Because that's how the life of pictures are these days. You need to emphasize and focus your attention to a finer detail, right? So you need to go focal. What does go focal mean? You need to just focus literally and metaphorically on the prime focus of your subject. In this case, I'll give you, this is again, not the best example, but I like this example because on the left, the building that you see, this material that you see here is the same that follows through here and here. And I could have easily gone somewhere here and clicked a picture with this face against this face. What I wanted to do was show a juxtaposition of this Spanish colonial revival architecture versus the contemporary architecture of the Trump Tower. But this right here says Trump. As soon as a person saw Trump, the idea and that feeling behind that picture changes entirely, right? And I did not want that. I wanted things to remain to architecture. I did not want them to get political. But as soon as your eye sees it, if I say don't think about an elephant, you're all thinking about an elephant right now, right? So, and again, this picture was clicked a year ago. Things were very sensitive a year ago when Trump was president, and things still are going to hell. But of course, the purpose of the picture goes away, and I didn't want that to happen. And this also allowed some breathing space between this building, which was my focus, versus this building, because this becomes in some sense, kind of a negative space. Okay. Third is simplify. So firstly, you need a theme. Second, you need to focus on attention. And third is simplify. I've said this in the very beginning that architects and interior designers are designing every inch, every corner, every millimeter. Sometimes they're over designing everything. And when you as an architectural photographer are supposed to click their product, click their design, you need to remove and strip down a lot of details from it. You need to distill those details and simplify them as much as possible, because the architect is not always going to be your consumer or your client. The layman on any random person on the street could be your client, and they need to see things as quick as possible, as simply as possible. And like I said, the life of an image is not a lot, a few seconds at best, right? So you need to simplify. In this example, this is the Federal Center designed by one of my favorite architects, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who designed the Federal Center. Uh, this detail that you see is followed through on this building as well. This building as well, everywhere. But I wanted to show the three sides. So this is one side, this is one side, and this is the same thing on a different scale. But my main point was not just the architectural elements, it was this, the Sears Star ka silhouette, because this is the icon of Chicago. Anybody who has been to Chicago or knows a little bit about its history knows about this building, and everybody loves this building because this is the face of the city. So it kind of, within the simplified architectural elements, the other detail was simply a silhouette. Did not want to show any finer details. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I would want to see the reflection perfectly like a mirror. No, this is how simple it should be, and anybody can relate to it who has some architectural knowledge of this context and space. Negative space. Cannot emphasize this enough. Can be good. Use it. Use it for your portfolios. Again, I'm talking to the students that are here today. Do not fill your portfolios with all the designs, all the plans, all the sections, everything that you have. No. Negative space is good. It allows your eyes to breathe, your brain to breathe. Do that. Okay. Uh, in a lot of pictures, in my case, you might not have found that those examples perfectly because the context and the subject of my pictures was not so. But a lot of times you should use the breathing space, negative space as part of your photo itself. And I cannot emphasize enough. It's not, at least when I was studying, this was not taught to us. We were told 15 sheets lao, 20 sheets lao, marks uske hisab se milenge. Architectural photography. Now, if you want a break, we can take a break now, but this is pretty much the end of it, another 10 minutes or so. Does anybody have any questions, by the way? Sorry, I told somebody that I would stop. I completely forgot. I saw somebody had their hands up. It could have been by mistake. Somebody raised their hand. Shubham? Bhavna, are we good with questions right now, or would you want?
Yeah, anything is okay. Like if you want to take questions now and someone has
Can
any
you
doubt, we can
unmute
clear
me?
it.
Was this your
Uh,
only question? Can you unmute me?
I had given the permission. I think Shubham, can you try unmuting yourself? Let me check.
I have a few. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, hi. I do have a few questions.
Of
The
course.
time when I interrupted you was during when you were talking about the ship's prow effect. So about the
Yeah.
picture you showed,
Huh.
uh, was that a picture edited in Photoshop, or there were two pictures, like one with the effect like this one?
No,
Uh,
that is a perfectly good question. That's why I chose a very old picture. This was when Photoshop did not exist. So this is something you can do in your camera itself. I
okay,
said, see how you can do it is simply changing the focus from the corner of the building to a little to its right.
okay,
Okay.
uh,
So yeah, that's how you can fix it. And also within the camera settings itself, you sometimes have a perspective control option where you can choose one plane of a building and tell your camera that this is the face that I want the picture to be parallel to. So then it will understand that this needs to be parallel, and it will perspective control and sort of, you know, converge those instead of those points converging, it will flatten it like this.
okay,
So to answer your question, it can be done in both the mediums, but you should try to do it on your camera first.
okay. Uh, the other question is when you were talking about grids.
Yeah,
I have seen it in my phone that there is a golden ratio grid. Like as designers, we follow golden ratio quite much
true.
in like while designing. So is this the grid you are talking about? Is that the golden ratio grid itself, or
No,
there's something else with the golden ratio grid in photography?
there's two things. Before I answer your question, Darshan, you asked what YouTube channel and podcast channel. I did not take this from a YouTube channel. I did take the photo editing and video editing wala cheese from a YouTube channel. I'll share that links and stuff with you. In fact, I'll tell you whatever I sourced it from. I also saw these things from somewhere and learned them from somewhere. I'll be happy to share. And I've at the end of the presentation, I have shared some links of pages and stuff. But again, coming back to your question, Shubham, the golden ratio rectangle is something that we use, yes, but the rule of thirds is something entirely different. Not entirely different. You could have your golden ratio and divide the golden ratio itself into 3 by 3 ka grid, and then use it for photography. The rule of thirds basically states whatever your main subject is should be on those lines. So if I have a person here, sorry, it's a very badly drawn person, but that person would be on this line. Okay, so what it could be a person, it could be a thing, it could be a toy, it could be a building or whatever. So it just needs to be on these defining lines. Now you say golden ratio. So golden ratio may be your the rectangle itself that you have. The borders could be of the golden ratio itself, but you could still follow the 3 by 3 grid form. And that's a very good question, because what you can do is, instead of cutting your photos in 5 by 11s or whatever the photo standards are, you could actually print them in golden ratio size. So your eyes will automatically at least like the frame that your photo has been shot at, and then look into whatever your subject, whatever your photo is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that perfectly sums it up. Uh, the other question is that, like from location to location, the quality of light varies. Like in India, we have yellow light, like I'm talking about sunlight here, and whereas in European countries or in America, there is good sense of white light of sunlight. So like how does like what do you have to talk, like say something about it,
I
and
think this
does
is another
photography
good
help us to?
question. So you can change the white balance of your camera. And there are equipments, I will talk about this. There are certain equipments for interior photography, because your interior architect chose a color temperature of the lights that is not white. How are you going to get the perfect color, right? And as an interior designer, you will be very, like Bhavna, I worked with Bhavna on a project 2016, yeah, 5 years ago. Uh, 227330 is the color code of that color that we used in that project. That's a hex code that I still remember today. So the interior designer wants the perfect shade to be visible that we design, not whatever is coming in your camera or on your screen. So that's a very good question and a very relevant question. How you tackle that is through changing the color balance and using certain equipments and lighting ideas. But I'll be able to answer that more, like far better in the second seminar, because I'll be talking about those specific equipments and settings that you can use to do that. But two things, एक तो is physical equipment that would entail your color balance in the camera, and using external equipments, एक lens के ऊपर एक cover type आता है that can control your color balance. And the second thing is post processing. But in terms of the light coming different in India versus US, I don't completely agree with that. It could do with, the dust in the air or the buildings around reflecting the lights differently. But that's, you could have yellow light here also in some settings, but that's how you could fix it.
And my last question, um,
Yeah.
what time do you suggest is ideal for outdoor daylight photography when the sun is not so harsh, but you want the sunlight in the picture, you want some shadows, you want
Are
sunlight.
you talking about architectural photography?
Actually, both interior and architecture as well.
I would say all the time. This was something that I is part of another slide. Aage. It's a building. It does not exist in a single time. It exists at 6 o'clock in the morning. It exists at 10 o'clock in the morning. It has different moods at different times. If you want to be a good architectural interior design photographer, you have to click the buildings throughout the clock, even at night. If you're an interior design photographer, then you have to click at night as well, because sometimes the light is coming oddly through the windows and you have to bracket things and stuff like that. But the bottom line is you have to click all the time. But for photographers, the golden hour is a good time when there's no shadow falling and stuff like that. That doesn't really work for architects. We want the shadows, we want the bad things as well. We want to know when your building is not being seen by the sun because some other building in front of it is stopping it. So there shouldn't ever be a time where you're not clicking pictures of buildings. Tufan as Snow, my roommate is a great photographer. He's I have been hibernating for the past 8 months. He has gone out in the snow, in the rain, in any weather, and click pictures. So yeah, that's any
Um,
other questions?
yes, one more.
Yeah,
Sorry if I've been bothering you.
no
Uh,
problem.
well, I am working on my thesis right now, and like I am almost done with my model, and I would be taking out renders soon.
Hmm.
So, what do you suggest? Like while clicking renders and photography, uh, uh, like the angles, the optical balance, all of these things, and while clicking renders, and how is it really different? Like the skills when you want to click good renders, you want to show that the building
Not different.
exists.
If I understand your question correctly, you want to know, can I use the photography principles or different principles when I'm clicking renders? And the answer is
Uh,
absolutely yes. Uh, at the end of the presentation, I'll share some pictures and other stuff and some of my renders to guide you better, and you can always reach out to me. But yes, the verticals, again, you are the architect or interior designer, whatever, right? Your straight lines are supposed to be straight lines, right? Your vertical lines, your horizontal, the heights, the eye level, your user is going to see it at a certain level. So everything has to be the same. Whatever I'm telling you today in architectural photography implies perfectly for architectural rendering. And this is something I've learned from my juniors. Bhavna would know, Rana Sarkar was my junior and has worked with in the same office. And that's something I learned from him. And that kind of came naturally eventually, because I thought to myself, why didn't I use my photography principles that I knew into rendering as well? So whatever I'm telling you today, follow it up in interior renders as well. And for the details of it, we can come back to it at the end of it, or you can reach out to me whenever.
sure, thank you.
No problem. So architectural photography trips, because only nerding out on theory does not cut it. I cannot emphasize this enough. जब भी मेरे को chance मिलता है, I sort of highlight the fact that I was not a great student, but I am not a bad practitioner in a lot of ways. At least मैं खुद की बड़ाई कर रहा हूँ, but that's what I feel. But just learning theory does not cut it. Architecture, as you know, as you graduates would know, actually people who are in the field, whatever we learned in college is so different from what the field is like. Nobody tells you to do taxes, right? Nobody tells you how annoying the client will be. Nobody tells you they consider your design firm to be a sari ki dukan, or like, you just take out designs out of your brain and it prints out. So there's a lot of difference. And these things that I'm about to tell you, they're not principles, but basic rules that and tips that you could follow and you need to think about. Again, these are those things where they'll help you be that guy who's thinking about that table on that glass or that cobweb in the corner or whatever. So first thing is, do not objectify buildings. अब आप सोचोगे कि how do you objectify buildings? People are objectified. अपने देश में, अपने दुनिया में, people are objectified and buildings are objectified as well. Let me tell you how. Hawa Mahal is a perfect example of it. This is a horrible example of a bad photo by me 10 years ago. Uh, we've all seen pictures of Hawa Mahal. How many of you actually know what? I'm pretty sure not a lot of you, right? Similarly, you look at any other monument, any other building, you will only Taj Mahal. We've mostly seen pictures from the front and maybe one side or whatever. We've not really seen the inner details, the close-up details, or so many things. But again, just coming back to this example, for decades, like for as long as I have existed, I have loved Jaipur, and Jaipur has been my muse to be an architect and designer. And it took me 25 years to actually finally go behind it and see what's behind it, right? So do not click buildings, do not see buildings from just the perspective that others have shown you or that you would think that would be the ideal to just show people, because architects don't design buildings based on angles that they would want to be clicked. People click buildings in a way where people think that the building is only limited to those angles. So you need to step out of that theory, step out of those limitations and click buildings outside of the norm and be able to show the architect and the client and your end user what your building really is. Okay? So don't, if you go to Hawa Mahal next, घुस जाओ विंडो में and click the detail of the window. पीछे जाओ, साइड में जाओ, drone shot लो, मतलब really think about the whole 3D aspect of things because you're converting the 3D into 2D as I said initially, right? So do not objectify buildings. And this is a very beautiful quote. Take a minute to read it. I will not read it for you. I don't like reading what's written in the presentation. Shows that I think you guys don't know how to read, but take a minute to read it, please. I will drink water. So moving on, I will come to questions after this. Close-up detail. God lies in the details. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe said it. We say he said it, but honestly, can you really believe that Ludwig Mies van der Rohe was the first person that said God lies in details? The architects of the Indian temples, the Greek temples, so many buildings that came before him. It is those details that really make something beautiful. And it is said that the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts and all of that. And you do click the whole edifice and things as a whole, but you do need to get closer. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier, don't objectify buildings. So sometimes we just take Taj Mahal दूर से एक सामने ले लिया, tag कर दिया Facebook पे कि मैं यहाँ था, Instagram पे photo डाल दी, you're done. Don't do that. Look at the finer details too. Include people. Architecture really does not exist without them. A lot of times we hate on people, we hate on cars, we hate on that light pole that is in front of the building. It's true that light pole should not have been there, but it is there. That is the only place that light pole exists. It's the only existing the poor light pole has. It is part of that setting. It is part of that context. Make it part of your photo. Make the people in your settings part of the photo, because not only do they help you understand the context, they also help you understand the scale of things. They help you understand who the users are for that photo or that setting that you're clicking in. Okay, so always try to include people. You can blur them, you can use shutter speed as I explained, you can use motion blur for shutter speed. Do that. Blur them out, post-process them out, thoda motion blurs, or remove them if you want to, but try to at least include people wherever you can. Lastly, be optimistic. And a lot of times photos, you think I have gotten 10 amazing photos, and you come home and you realize not a single photo has come. It happens to me all the time. It happened to me the last time I did photography and came back. It happened to me the time before. One of the best times I did my best photography was with my father. We went to Kumbhalgarh and I was stupid enough to delete the photos because I thought I had made a backup. So after a whole days of hard work, I deleted my photos myself, thinking I had made a backup. So that all of that is okay. The point here is the best work that you would always do as a photographer, as a designer, is the work that you will do tomorrow, right? Because we're only getting better every day. What's the worst you're going to do? Exactly that, your worst. But the next time you will do better, right? So be optimistic when it comes to photography, when it comes to designing. It does not mean you be lazy about doing things today. You can only get better tomorrow, and be optimistic for tomorrow once you're learning today too. Okay. And these are some of the references that you can, screenshot to add to your folders. That'll never be opened again. That's what I do. I take a lot of screenshots, but never go back to it. But these are some of the very good and known architecture and interior design magazines. You can find a lot of material on how to be a good architectural photographer or designer in general. There's only one Desi one here, which is Mark Publications. I highly recommend it. My father was the one that introduced me to it. It's by the Tata Group, and there, if you can subscribe, if you can afford, please do. It's really amazing. They really control the tangible and the intangible aspect of whatever they cover, and they cover a lot of important things. But of course, all of them are good in their own way. And lastly, stay indoors. Please don't go out. Stay safe and take care. That's it from my end. Thank you. I see Shubham's hand raised. Yes, Shubham. And yes, now I'm open to questions. So if anybody has any questions. The presentation, no, it's a trade secret, I would say. No, it's not. It's the font is Nexa bold and Nexa light. Let me write it in the chat so you can remember Nexa bold and Nexa light. I'm glad you looked at the finer details of the font as well. I spent a lot of time on it. And I mean, some of my students might need to leave. If you, अगर आप लोग को जाना है, शायद नीरज सर को आपको पढ़ाना है, so please feel free to leave. And in case anybody else needs to leave and wants to reach out, this is my email, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. You can reach out whenever you want. Any other questions? Is there any difference? Sorry, wait, I can't scroll at the perfect level either. It's too much or too less. Okay, I got it. Is there a difference in how contemporary and heritage buildings should be treated in architecture photography? That's a very good question. It's also quite subjective. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that? Treated in what sense? But from what I understand, how heritage and contemporary buildings should be treated. Heritage buildings had the liberty and the funding to be extra, to really look at the finer details, to be ornamental, to have all those things that a lot of buildings today don't have, right? So when I said, you need to look deeper, you need to get closer, you need to look at the finer details, that's something you can really do with the heritage buildings. Again, you can do the same with contemporary as well, but I'm coming to that. With the modern buildings, the modern architecture philosophy was what? You bring the out in, you have larger windows, you have clear visibility of what is happening outside, and the same goes for outside to in. So that ornamentation, that difference in detail at different levels and tiers was lost. So in some sense, when you're clicking modern buildings, I feel you
just to cut in, I'm sorry, I did not mean modern, I meant contemporary. So I'm not like asking in terms of modern architecture specifically. And I basically, because from when I think about contemporary buildings, I think a lot more about heights. I think a lot more about a more of a cleaner design in terms of material. But when you look at heritage buildings, it's there's a lot more richness in terms of texture. There's a lot more richness in terms of how the ears have treated those buildings and how they are visible on them. The passage of time is visible on them. So I was asking in that context, if there are any pointers you could give us on that.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't answer that. I don't think I would be the best person to answer that. But from what I would understand is for contemporary buildings, we can relate and understand, and there is a inherent need to study the immediate context around it. So like you said, there is height. So from all the principles that I told you in the past, you need to step away to be able to show all that height, right? So when you step away, also try to show that context and setting that the contemporary building has come into existence, because that's something we need to question today, especially in today's times. So Yeah, I think for contemporary versus heritage, one basic difference would be contemporary would be more zoomed out and heritage would be more zoomed in. Of course, it's subjective. It depends what you're studying also. It could change. The second thing that you could possibly do is in a lot of heritage buildings, you don't have that level of access or that level of, approachability. In some examples, of course, like, you can't go on the top of Taj Mahal that easily. But you can do that for a lot of contemporary buildings. And they have a lot of functional aspects that don't work anymore in the heritage buildings. Something as simple as toilets, right? So uh, the services, the functionality, the interior life of it, like how the building really lives, is something that you can do in contemporary buildings and not so much in heritage buildings. But I'm still not sure. Like I'm not too satisfied with this answer. I will get back to you, and that's a really good question.
All right, thank you so much.
Zoomed out and in is one thing. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Shubham, 1 second. I have the picture on the screen is in exception to keeping the back of the camera straight, right? It is, but it is also not. I was at an angle when I clicked it, and this is not a photo. This is more of an artwork. This is not the actual color. This was clicked during the cold winter, and I was missing Rajasthan ka Gerua color, and I painted it pink. But you see, things might not be, the linear lines are not linear, but they are parallel to each other at a diagonal. So I wanted to show movement within the picture. That's why I decided to show, like, again, it can get pretty boring to show the horizontal as horizontal. I wanted to make the horizontal diagonal and the vertical vertical. The verticals are still perfectly straight. So it is, the camera ka back itself is straight. Good catch though. It could have not been. It is pretty close to not being it, but it is. Yeah. Sorry, Shubham. Yeah, you were asking a question.
My question is that, sir, I saw your Instagram page right now, and like I can see the
That was
use of
quick.
magenta
Yeah.
color in the facade. Like you must have posted pictures. So, can you talk about the use of color palettes while post processing? Like sometimes people like monochromatic, like they make it all black and white, yet and they highlight some one particular feature with either a particular color or something. Just magenta, like
I
you
would
just said,
say
it reminds you of
I would say
Jaipur.
go crazy. There is no, like, that's what I felt. That's how I was feeling at the time. I was missing, like I said, we had a very bad cold winter in Chicago. It's still going on. It snowed like 4 days ago, and it's the end of April. So I was missing the pinks and the yellows of Rajasthan. So I went with it. There is, if somebody tells you this color is not right, usually I would say it's none of their business when it comes to your art. But there are certain principles and rules to be followed. Everything that I've told you until now is all these rules exist. But there is one rule that I forgot to tell you guys about, which was you have to break all these rules. Picasso broke all the rules, but Picasso broke those rules after he had studied all the rules perfectly. Picasso could have painted like Leonardo da Vinci, but he decided not to after understanding those rules. Your question, to answer it more directly, would be I don't have an answer. It's pretty subjective. What setting, what context, who is your client, what is your end goal with it. But if it's an artwork for yourself, like most of my stuff on Instagram is for myself, it's what I felt and what I was comfortable with, and that's why I went with it, honestly. Thank you, Nikhilendra. Yeah, sorry, Shun. Does that answer your question? I mean, can pick one post or something and tell me, and then I can tell you a more direct answer maybe. Any other questions while Shubham is possibly looking for a specific post?
Do we have any more questions? You guys can unmute yourself and ask him whatever you feel like.
Yeah, and please feel free to give feedback. This is something I would want to add further on. And yeah, let me know however I could help.
Yeah, we've dropped a link in the chat box for your feedback.
Nice to see you, Digvijay, by the way. Hope you're well.
Sanil sir, you've always been so nice and interactive. Do you want to say something?
हाँ, मैं राह देख रहा था, बाकी सब क्वेश्चन हो गया.
No, we were waiting for you.
Yes. थैंक यू सर. मुझे ये बहुत ज़्यादा सही लगा कि जब भी हम किसी वास्तु या किसी बिल्डिंग या किसी आर्किटेक्ट ने की हुई चीज़ का फ़ोटो निकालने जाएंगे तो एक आर्किटेक्ट ने बताई हुई चीज़ हमेशा वो फ़ोटो निकालने के पहले 2 मिनट सोची जाएगी अभी कि भाई इतने मेहनत से वो बिल्डिंग बनी है, वो उनका एक स्कल्पचर रहता है और स्कल्पचर का फ़ोटो निकालते वक्त अपने थोड़ा सा तो भी ध्यान देना चाहिए. तो आज का जो टॉक्स, आपकी बातें जो सुनी हमने, उससे ये यकीन मैं दे सकता हूँ कि उस वजह से 2 मिनट हम रुककर हम उस सारी चीज़ों को ध्यान रखकर हम आगे लोगों तक फ़ोटो पहुँचाएंगे. तो उस वजह से उस बिल्डिंग की गरिमा बोलिए या उस बिल्डिंग के पीछे का जो सच छुपा होता है वो लोगों को दिखेगा तो भी, क्योंकि बहुत बार सिर्फ फ़ोटो से ही हम सारी चीज़ें हार जाते हैं, क्योंकि फ़ोटो उस तरीके से दिखाई नहीं जाती जिसकी वो होनी चाहिए. तो आज का पूरा आपकी बातों का जो पूरी जर्नी रही वो सही में बहुत ज़्यादा स्ट्रांगली हमारे दिलो दिमाग में रहनी चाहिए हर फोटो खींचते वक्त. तो थैंक यू सर कि आपने उतनी डिटेल से हर चीज़, और आपने जो स्टोरीज बताई कि डिटेल तक कैसे पहुँचते हर चीज़ के, तो बहुत ही सही था. और एक आर्किटेक्ट ने बताना कि हमारे काम को किस तरह से देखना चाहिए और किस तरह से लोगों के सामने रखना चाहिए, ये बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट था. तो आपकी सोच और समझ को सलाम, और आगे हमेशा ध्यान रखे रहेंगे कि इस तरह से हम सोचे और उस तरह से लोगों के सामने वो चीज़ें लेके आए.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
बट जो आपने कहा सर, उसका दूसरा पहलू भी सच ही है कि अगर एक फोटोग्राफर या कोई भी इंसान, he does not owe anything to the architect या ओनर, उसको जो अच्छा लग रहा है, उसको जो सही लगे उस टाइम पे, वो नेचुरली आना चाहिए. अगर वो नहीं आया तो कुछ हद तक वो आर्किटेक्ट की भी गलती है या लैक ऑफ डिटेल डिजाइन है, या एक जो नेचुरल फ्लो आता है वो भी एक चीज एग्जिस्ट करती है कि अगर एक इंसान सामने से ही एक ही चीज देख रहा है तो वो शायद इसलिए देख रहा है क्योंकि आपने बाकी चीजों को देखने का कुछ ऐसा पहलू रखा ही नहीं डिजाइन में जो नेचुरली इंसान वहां तक पहुंच पाए. वो कुछ ही खुराफाती लोग होते हैं जो चीजों में घुस जाते हैं और फिर क्वेश्चन करते हैं और अलग अलग एंगल से देखते हैं. सो एज एन आर्किटेक्ट मैं ये एक्सपेक्ट नहीं कर सकता कि सब करें. आज मेरे को ये चांस मिला कि मैं बता पाया, तो मे बी आप में से कुछ लोग को ये चीज याद रहे, बट वो अच्छी चीज है कि आप करें. बट अगर आप नहीं भी करें तो you're not wrong in your own
नहीं
sense.
रॉन्ग और राइट का नहीं, पर जब हम किसी चीज को समझकर 2 मिनट भी रुक पाए और आपकी बातें याद रखकर हम उस तरीके से सोच भी पाए अगर, तो हमारे फोटो में बहुत ड्रास्टिक चेंज आ जाएगा।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
यानी
आई थिंक सर अपने यहाँ सॉरी मैं आपको बीच में
नहीं बोलिए ना।
अपने यहाँ बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क है इस चीज़ का कि यहाँ पे इंटीरियर का जो शूट करते हैं लोग, उनका आपको टाइम फ्रेम में अगर एवरेज बताऊं तो आपका 8 घंटे का वर्क डे मान लें आप, या 10 घंटे का वर्क डे मान लें आप, उसमें से एक फोटो इनकी, और ये एवरेज है, कई लोग का ज़्यादा भी होता है, एक फोटो 1.5 घंटे में आती है यहाँ साइट पे। और मैंने इंटीरियर फोटोग्राफी करवाई है लोगों से दूसरे के प्रोजेक्ट्स के लिए, कुछ मेरे प्रोजेक्ट्स के लिए, 1.5 घंटे में तो पूरा घर करके चले जाते हैं लोग। ऑफकोर्स वो फर्क है, मैं ये नहीं कह रहा सब ऐसे हैं वो क्या है, बट पेशेंस का खेल तो बहुत ज्यादा है फोटोग्राफी। और ये शुभम ने बहुत सही सवाल पूछा था कि बिल्डिंग की फोटो कब खींचनी चाहिए। ये बहुत जरूरी चीज है समझना कि बिल्डिंग तो 24 घंटे एग्जिस्ट करती है और हर घंटे एक अलग ही मूड होता है एक बिल्डिंग का। तो वो 1.5 घंटा देना, चाहे आपको नहीं भी मालूम कि आप क्या कर सकते हो, तब भी आप, मैं तो कहूंगा कि अगर आपके पास टाइम है, आप स्टूडेंट हो या खुद का पैशन प्रोजेक्ट कर रहे हो, तो आप 1.5 घंटे खड़े ही रहो उसी जगह, जब तक बोर होगे, जब तक आपके दिमाग में चीज नहीं आएगी कि आप इसमें क्या चेंज कर सकते हो। तो
एकदम सही बात है आपकी। हम सारे डिजाइनर या आर्टिस्ट लोग यही कहते हैं ना कि हमारा जो प्रोडक्ट बनता है या पेंटिंग बनता है, स्कल्पचर बन रहा है या बिल्डिंग बन रही है, वो अपने से बातें ही करती है। तो जब भी वो आवाज़ दे तब फोटो खींचनी चाहिए, तो आवाज़ देने लायक कान बनने चाहिए ये बहुत ज़रूरी है। तो आज मैंने आपके उस वजह से तो शायद हमारे कान बजेंगे, तो हमको सुनाई देगा कि अच्छा ये अभी ये आवाज़ तो सुनना है यार, अभी तो सुन लेना चाहिए। तो उस आवाज़ सुनने के लिए ही हमारे लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है कि इस तरह से जो टॉक्स होते हैं, जो बातें कही जाती है, जो उस ज़िंदगी में जिए लोग होते हैं, उन्होंने अगर कही तो ज़्यादा बेटर होती है। तो आज की आपकी बातें आपकी पूरी ज़िंदगी की वो थॉट प्रोसेस को कहती है ना, तो वो इम्पोर्टेंट है कि हम उस तरीके से एक सेकंड सोचकर हम फोटो को एकदम चेंज कर दे। तो ये मैं है ना, ये नहीं बोल रहा हूँ कि किसी की यानी पिकासो जैसा पिकासो हो ही नहीं सकता कोई, पर पिकासो अगर समझ जाए तो पिकासो जैसा काम तो नहीं कर पाएंगे, ये तो यकीन दिलाता हूँ मैंने। जब पिकासो समझ जाएगा तो पिकासो जैसा कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे और उसके आगे 2 कदम जा पाएंगे। तो आपकी चीज़ें जितनी भी सोची है यानी आपने और आपने बताई, तो एक कदम आगे का फोटो निकाल कर तो आपको कभी तो भी हम भेज पाएंगे। तो इतने तो आपकी बातों से होनी चाहिए ना, तो ही तो मज़ा है। तो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगता है कि बातों से हम बहुत सारी चीज़ें सीख जाते हैं, तो शायद हम क्लास में नहीं पढ़ पाते। तो आपकी ऐसी हमेशा जो अनुभव की हुई बातें हैं वो कहते रहिए, और हमेशा हम अलग अलग जगह पे मिलते कर सुनते रहेंगे।
नहीं बिल्कुल सर, वो तो आई एम ग्रेटफुल टू द इंस्टीट्यूट एंड भावना ने अपॉर्चुनिटी दी मेरे को।
यस।
बट क्या एनी अदर क्वेश्चंस, किसी को कोई और सवाल? थैंक यू हिमानी, थैंक यू अमरचंद। Yeah, I think if we have no further questions that we can end it.
Yes.
मेरे यहाँ 1:30 बज गया।
But thank you so much. Thank you, Ranjay, for doing
thank
this.
Thank
and
you
it
for...
was so informative and was so helpful. I'm sure a lot of people here had gained insight on and have had a different, take on how to do this architectural photography. And the way you presented was amazing. And it's very informative.
So much, thank you.
And thank you for staying up. We like, for us it's at least daytime. Here we are sitting.
No, I don't mind.
And
it's not every day you get a chance. 40 लोगों को ज्ञान दे रहा हूँ, सब सुन रहे हैं, ऑप्शन तो क्यों नहीं जगह रहूंगा।
नहीं, पर आपकी बातों के वजह से हम रुके रहने इतने घंटे, नहीं तो क्या है बात अगर रुका
मैं
उसकी भी है।
your talk, this thing was very gripping. Like everyone held on to the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Good day.
So see you all tomorrow for our next workshop on this musical instrument Noori, which is tomorrow evening. And Rananjay's next workshop is on the 29th of April, same time, 10 a.m. You can find the details on ISOT's Facebook page and also Instagram page. If you want, you can get in touch with us directly for any kind of information, or if you're not receiving links for further events. Thank you all. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Ranjay.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Bye bye.
Take care. Thank you again.
Bye.